Hello and welcome to Drunk on Tea. Today I'm going to be revisiting my very first Warhammer 40,000 miniature. This Space Marine painted in an absolutely disgusting camo paint style and seeing if I could update this colour scheme onto a modern Space Marine with better results. So the first thing I've done is I've primed this model white. This will give us a nice bright and smooth base coat for the rest of our colours to work from. Now I'm coming in with some Avalan Sunset and I'm going to paint this all over the miniature. So the first big change from the original mini I painted almost 30 years ago is I'm actually thinning my paints so I can get some nice smooth, even coverage without filling in any of the detail. Back then I used to try and coat everything with just one coat, whereas now I know to take the time, slowly build up the layers of paint until I get a nice solid coverage all over the miniature. So because of modern paints, this isn't going to be as bright as my original Space Marine, but that's fine. A more muted look will be slightly better anyway. So I'm just working in a couple of layers now of Avalan Sunset until I get a smooth, even coverage all over the power armor to the Space Marine. I'm not worrying about being particularly neat at this stage. Doesn't matter if I get Avalan Sunset over other areas, because I'll be coming in later and painting all of these details. But for now I want to make sure I work this into all of the recesses so I don't have any white primer showing through. Just paint all of the Space Marine with a couple of layers of Avalan Sunset. You can see how the first layer is very patchy, so I'm going to need to come back through with 2 or 3 layers until I get that solid coat all over the power armor. And after a couple of layers of Avalan Sunset, you can see I've got a nice smooth, even base coat all over the power armor. So now it's going to be time to paint the undersuit to the Space Marine and the casing to his gun. For this I'll be using Corvus Black. I'm going to be very careful as I apply this into all of the areas of exposed undersuit. So all of these ridged sections showing through from the panels of the power armor. Trying not to get any of this accidentally over the Avalan Sunset because it will be quite hard to paint over. I'm just applying a couple of layers of Corvus Black to all of the areas of undersuit. So it might take a couple of layers to get a solid black cover, but that's okay. After this first layer is dried, I'll come back in and apply a second coat to all of the undersuit. I'm also catching any of the straps on the model, so he's got these ones on his back. If there's any cables or anything like that as well, I'm going to catch these with Avalan Sunset at this stage as well. And I'm going to paint all over the bolt rifle to the Space Marine. I'm not worried about if I get this over areas I'm going to be painting with metallics later. I find a black base coat gives a nicer base for painting metallics than the yellow or the white. So I'm just making sure I catch all of these areas with some Corvus Black. And after the Corvus Black has been applied, you can see how it's given a pop of detail to the model, broken up that yellow power armor. So the next step is I'm going to paint the belt. For this I'm using Rhinox hide. And I'm just going to paint this along the belt, going around his waist. Once again, being really neat around the Avalan Sunset we've already painted. But just making sure I catch all of that belt with a layer of Rhinox hide. You can see at each stage thinned my paints down so they flow nice and smoothly. No more blockiness, no more filling in all of the details. Over 30 years of painting, I've learned a lot of lessons. But the most important lesson for any miniature painter is how to thin your paints so you can get nice, smooth, even coverage without filling in all the details of your models. With the belt picked out, the next step is to pick out all of the metallics on the model. And for this I'll be using Lead Belcher. I'm just going to pick out all of the metallic details. And first of these I want to be is the Aquila on his chest. I'm going to go with a silver Aquila The original model didn't have one on his chest, or if it did, I painted over it so badly you can't see it. But I thought a nice silver Aquila would look quite good on the model. I'm also going to paint all of the metallic details on the weapon, including the Aquila on the bolt gun as well. I'm just going to make sure I catch things like the muzzle, the magazine housing, any of those details with a couple of layers of lead belcher, just so I get a nice solid coat on all these metallic details on the bolt rifle. And then I'm also going to pick out any of the metallic details on the Space Marine. So this is going to be details like the vents on the backpack. I'm painting the ones at the bottom and the ones at the top, although these top ones will be painted over in the next step. I'm also picking out any that are on the Space Marine itself, so I think there's a couple of spots on his helmet, details like that. I'm just looking around and painting anything I want to be metallic with some lead belcher. And with the lead belcher apply, there's just one final base coat that I'm going to apply to this Space Marine at this stage. That's I'm going to paint those metallic vents at the top of his backpack with some Magma Droth Flame contrast paint. I'm hoping that this will give a slight metallic look to these vents while also giving them a sort of bright red burning effect. I don't know why, as a kid I was obsessed with painting these parts red, so I'm going to carry that on now with this Space Marine. So I'm just applying some of this contrast paint over the lead belcher, hoping that it will give a nice red metal look once it's dried. With the vents picked out, you can see how it's still got a little bit of that shine from the metallics, but it has definitely given it a red to orange colour on those vents. And now it's time to start shading the miniature. So the first shade I'm coming in with is Agrak's Earthshade. And we're applying this as a pin shade to all of the power armour on the model. So I'm going to really take my time at this step, ensure that I get nice, smooth, even lines in all of those recesses of the power armour with some Agrak's Earthshade. Once again, this is another step that really wasn't done when I was a kid. We didn't have shade paints like this. Mostly we were just thinning down black paint, so it was really, really thin, and then applying it all over the model. It didn't give the best effects, especially when you didn't really know what you were doing. But now I'm a lot older, I know how pin shades work, how to get them to give the best effect, and how to apply them without accidentally getting shade over the rest of the model. If I do make any mistakes, like there is some around the hands there, I'm just going to come back in once this is dried and tidy it back up with a bit of Avalanche Sunset so I get a nice smooth even cover again. And obviously, as with any pin shade, if you do notice you've come in too heavy, you can wick some away with a dry brush. Stop it pooling too heavily in any of the recesses. I'm just making sure I work my way around the model, applying this pin shade into all of the recesses of the power armour. We'll really make all of those details pop and add some definition to the Space Marine. And now with some known oil, I'm going to shade all the other details. So it's all of the undersuit. I'm going to apply a shade of known oil to all of these areas. So it will sink into those recesses, darken down those grooves. I'm also applying it to the Rhinox hide belt. And of course, anything we painted with lead belcher. So the Aquila, all of the details on the gun, all of these areas, I'm just shading these with some known oil. So it will sink into those recesses, add definition, and really make these details pop. If you're enjoying the video, please press like. If you want more videos, press the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. If you would like to support the channel and become a member, please press the join button down below. And after all of those shades have dried, you can see how they've really added definition all over the power armor to the Space Marine. So the next step is I'm going to start highlighting the power armor. And for this, I'll be using Uriel Yellow. I'm just going to apply this as an edge highlight to all of the power armor of the Space Marine. So wherever we've got the edge of a panel, sharp detail, anything like that, coming in and applying a thin line of Uriel Yellow to the edge of all of these details. Trying to keep these lines nice and thin. If at any point I do come in a little bit too thick, I can tidy back up with a bit of Avalanche Sunset. But I'm trying to keep the pressure on my brush nice and even, so I get nice smooth lines around all of the panels and the power armor. So this is another step that I really didn't do as a child. I had no idea about edge highlighting or how to do it. But now, after years of experience, I've realized how much it really does add to a model. Even a subtle edge highlight can really make all the details on your miniature stand out. So I recommend doing it wherever you can. Applying edge highlights to all your models really does help make all of the panels and details and things on models stand out, give the impression of them catching light. It really helps your models to be read at a distance, so you can see the shapes a lot easier. So I'm just working my way around the model at this stage, applying an edge highlight of Uriel Yellow to the edge of all of the panels. Once this dries, it's not going to be the brightest of highlights, but it will give a really nice effect to the Space Marine. With that edge highlight applied, you can see how it's made those panels stand out. At this point, I'm basically painting an Imperial fist, it seems. But the next thing I'm going to paint are the eyes. For this, I'll be coming in with Abaddon Black first. I don't normally do this for Space Marine eyes, but the ones I painted on the original model have black eye lenses, so I'm going to copy this now. So at this stage, I'm just carefully sinking in the Abaddon Black into the recesses of those eye lenses. So you're being really careful around all the other details on the Space Marine, but just catching those eye lenses with some Abaddon Black. And now I'm coming in with some Dawnstone. I'm going to apply a really thin line at the very bottom of those eye lenses. We'll give the impression of a bit of light at the very bottom of each lens. Give them a bit of life other than just being a pure black eye lens. And finally, with some white scar, just going to add a small spot to the very back corner of each of the eye lenses. Just look like a light reflection point. You want to keep this spot really small, but just apply a small spot of white scar in the very back corner of each of the eye lenses. And with the eye lenses picked out, that's really made the model come to life. With the extra colours, they don't just look like cold, dead black eyes. So next I'm going to highlight all the other black details on the model. And for this, I'll be using Mechanica Standard Grey. I'm going to start off by applying an edge highlight just to the very tops of all the ridges to the undersuit. Some of these are really small details, so I'm being nice and careful and just catching the very tops of those ridges with a thin line of Mechanica Standard Grey. This works really well with the shade we applied to really create some definition to that undersuit, and also picking out any of the ridges on any of the straps and details like that. And at this stage as well, I'm also going to apply a highlight to the casing on the bolt rifle. So for this one, you can be slightly thicker with a bit of a chunky edge highlight, because I'm going to come in and apply another edge highlight to the casing to the gun. With the Mechanica Standard Grey applied, you can see how it's made some of those details stand out. So now I'm going to apply a second highlight to the casing to the bolt gun. For this, I'll be using Dawnstone. I'm just now going to apply really carefully in the middle of all the areas we just applied the Mechanica Standard Grey on the gun casing. This will smooth out any of those lines that may be a little bit wonky, as well as giving a nice transition from the dark Mechanica Standard Grey to the lighter Dawnstone. So try and keep this a little bit smaller, in the previous step, I'm just working my way around that gun casing, applying a thin edge highlight of Dawnstone. With that Dawnstone applied, that is the gun highlighted. There's only a few details left to highlight now on the model. The next of these will be the belt, which I'm going to highlight with some Gorthor Brown. For this, I'm just applying a thin edge highlight at the top and bottom of the belt, just to break up that dark brown colour and give the impression of a sort of leather belt going around his waist. I'm trying to keep these lines nice and even, quite small, just picking out the edge of the belt with an edge highlight. So that's the belt highlighted. The next step is I'm going to highlight those red vents at the top of his backpack. For this, I'll be using Troll Slayer Orange. I'm just going to carefully apply an edge highlight of Troll Slayer Orange to the very tips of those vents. This should just give the impression of light catching off the sharp edge, work with the contrast paint, and give a really nice effect to those red vents on his backpack. With those vents painted, the only thing left to highlight now are the metallics, and after that I'll be moving on to attempting to paint that camo pattern. So for the metallics, I'll be using Stormhose Silver and just applying this as an edge highlight to all of the details we painted with Lead Belcher. So I'm just catching some of the sharpest points, most raised details of anything we paint with Lead Belcher. So all of the detailing on the gun, magazine housing, casing, areas like that. I'm just catching these with some Lead Belcher. And I'm also going to do the same to the Aquila on his chest. So I'm picking out any of the feathers or raised details to the skull, just catching these with a little bit of Stormhose Silver. And the same to the lower vents on the backpack as well, just catching these with a small edge highlight. And with all of those highlights applied, the model looks quite nice. But now it's time to try and give it that look of my first model by painting the camo pattern. So I somehow have to replicate these brown spots, which just look awful. But let's see if I can do it and make this look good on a modern Marine. So first of all, I'm using some Steel Legion Drab. I'm going to try and paint some sort of organic looking blotchy shapes all over the power armor. So I'm just picking some spots. I'm trying to paint some shapes. I don't really have any straight lines. So I'm taking this box and just adding some curvy edges to it, trying to create some organic looking blotches all over the power armor. You don't want to go too heavy with these, but you do want to add enough so that it looks like it's an intended pattern all over the Space Marine. I'm just applying a few spots in different areas, different panels. I've got my Steel Legion Drab quite thin here, so I can paint in a couple of layers to ensure I get a nice solid coat. Where I've got the edge of a panel, I'm not carrying it over onto the panel besides it. I'm making it look like they're made from separate parts of armor. So each one will just end at the edge of a panel if needed. But I'm just working my way around the Space Marine, applying some of these patches of Steel Legion Drab to be the base of my camo pattern. And after a while, I've worked all the way around the model and applied some sort of leopard spotting all over the Space Marine. Doesn't look too bad at the minute. So now I'm doing the same with some Mournfang Brown. For this, I'm going to paint splotches again all over the power armor. Some of these will intersect with the other ones. Some of them will be standalone splotches. I'm trying to keep this pattern random. I don't want it looking too uniformed all over. Obviously, the point of camo is to break up the shape of a person, which is something that Space Marines really don't seem to care about. So I'm just applying some splotches of Mournfang Brown all over the power armour, much like I did with the Steel Legion Drab. So you don't want to go too heavy with these, but you do want to put enough that it definitely feels like they're intended to be there. It's a very fine line. This is where I think it starts to go wrong with this paint scheme. Perhaps leaving it as just the leopard spotting may have been better. Now I've applied the Mournfang Brown all over the Space Marine. It has given a camo pattern, but it's given the look of a very messy Space Marine. So now with some Baylor Brown, I'm going to apply an edge highlight to some of the parts that I paint with Steel Legion Drab. So where they meet the edge of a panel or detail like that, I'm putting an edge highlight in with some Baylor Brown. This should give the impression of them reaching the edge of the panels, allow that edge highlight to carry along where we may have painted over some of our yellow edge highlight. And with some Scrag Brown, I'm doing exactly the same for the Mournfang Brown spots. So where these meet the edge of a panel, I'm applying a little bit of Scrag Brown just to continue that edge highlight. So we should have an unbroken line of yellow, Baylor Brown and or Scrag Brown to any of the points in the power armour. As I said, this step takes a while. I really don't think it adds much, unfortunately. I don't think camo patterns suit Space Marines. I have thought of a few ways that I could perhaps get this looking a little bit better. I personally feel it still looks very messy, although the paint job is a lot tidier than my original Space Marine from 30 years ago. But let me know in the comments down below, what do you think about this pattern? Do you think it can be improved? Do you think there are ways to get a desert camo Space Marine without it looking too busy? But thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And as always, an extra special thank you to Jenkins, our Tea Lover channel member. Thank you so much for the support. And happy painting!